Idi Amin, the name still sends shivers down the spines of many Ugandans. Born in a time of colonial rule, his early life remains shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that he rose through the ranks of the British colonial army, displaying both physical prowess and a ruthless ambition. Amin's path crossed with Milton Obote, a charismatic politician who would become Uganda's first prime minister. Amin, with his military background, became a key ally to Obote. He was instrumental in consolidating Obote's power, eventually securing control over the army and police. However, the alliance was not to last. Amin, always hungry for power, saw an opportunity in Obote's increasingly autocratic rule. While Obote was abroad, Amin seized his chance. In 1971, he launched a military coup, overthrowing Obote and declaring himself president. Initially, Amin was met with widespread support. He presented himself as a man of the people, promising peace and prosperity. He released political prisoners and disbanded Obote's feared secret police. This period of hope, however, was tragically short-lived. Amin quickly consolidated his power, eliminating any potential rivals. His rule transformed into a brutal dictatorship. Fear and violence became the tools of his regime. The world watched in horror as Uganda, once a beacon of hope in East Africa, descended into chaos and bloodshed. Amin's early life and military career were a prelude to the brutality that would define his rule. He was a product of his time, shaped by the violence of colonialism and the power struggles of a newly independent nation. His rise to power was swift and calculated, a testament to his ambition and ruthlessness. However, the hope that initially greeted his coup soon gave way to terror, marking the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in Uganda's history. Amin's rule was characterized by extreme violence and a complete disregard for human life. His regime unleashed a wave of terror that swept across Uganda. Anyone perceived as a threat, real or imagined, was targeted. Political opponents, intellectuals, members of certain ethnic groups, and even ordinary citizens were not spared. Amin created a network of informers and secret police, instilling fear and paranoia in every corner of society. The death toll under Amin's regime is estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands. His killer squads, often composed of loyal soldiers, roamed the country, carrying out extrajudicial killings and disappearances. Prisons became overcrowded with political prisoners, subjected to torture and inhumane conditions. The stories of survivors are harrowing accounts of brutality, survival, and unimaginable loss. Amin's reign of terror had a devastating impact on Ugandan society. The constant fear and violence shattered communities and destroyed lives. The country's infrastructure crumbled as skilled professionals were killed or forced to flee. Uganda, once a vibrant and promising nation, was left scarred and traumatized by Amin's brutality. In 1972, Amin made a decision that would have a catastrophic impact on Uganda's economy. Citing a supposed need to empower indigenous Ugandans, he ordered the expulsion of the country's Asian population, most of whom were of Indian descent. These Asians, many of whom had lived in Uganda for generations, played a vital role in the country's economy. They owned businesses, managed industries, and contributed significantly to the country's economic output. The expulsion was brutal and chaotic. Asians were given just 90 days to leave the country, forced to abandon their homes, businesses, and belongings. Many fled to neighboring countries or to Britain, which had a large South Asian community. The economic consequences were immediate and devastating. With the Asian population gone, businesses were left without owners and skilled workers. Industries ground to a halt, and the economy went into freefall. Amin's decision to expel the Asians was a disastrous act of economic self-sabotage. Driven by a toxic mix of nationalism, resentment, and economic ignorance, it plunged Uganda into further poverty and chaos. The expulsion remains a dark stain on Uganda's history, a reminder of the devastating consequences of prejudice and economic mismanagement. Idi Amin's brutality is undeniable, but some of the stories surrounding his regime are shrouded in myth and speculation. One persistent rumor, often repeated in the media, is that Amin was a cannibal. While he did make a chilling statement in 1976, confessing to tasting human flesh and calling it salty, there is no concrete evidence to support the cannibalism allegations. Anthropologists and historians who have studied Amin's regime have cast doubt on the cannibalism claims. They argue that these stories likely originated from propaganda spread by Amin's enemies, both within Uganda and internationally. It's important to note that during Amin's reign, there was a deliberate campaign to demonize him and discredit his regime. While his brutality was very real, some of the more sensationalized stories appear to be exaggerations or outright fabrications. Separating fact from fiction when it comes to Idi Amin's regime is crucial. While it's tempting to believe the most shocking stories, it's important to rely on credible evidence and historical analysis. Amin's true crimes, the mass killings, torture and economic devastation, are horrific enough without resorting to unsubstantiated rumors. In 1976, Idi Amin's regime became embroiled in an international crisis that would further tarnish his image and isolate Uganda on the world stage. A group of Palestinian and leftist militants hijacked an Air France flight en route from Tel Aviv to Paris. The hijackers, demanding the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel and other countries, forced the plane to land at Entebbe Airport in Uganda. Amin, always eager to insert himself into international affairs and court controversy, welcomed the hijackers. He provided them with refuge and even met with them personally. The hijackers separated the Israeli passengers from the others, releasing most of the non-Israelis. The world watched in horror as the hostage crisis unfolded. Israel, determined to rescue its citizens, launched a daring raid on Entebbe Airport. In a meticulously planned operation, Israeli commandos flew thousands of miles, stormed the airport and freed the hostages. The raid was a stunning military success, but it came at a cost. One Israeli soldier, the unit commander, was killed in action, as were all the hijackers and several Ugandan soldiers. The Entebbe raid humiliated Amin on the world stage. It exposed his willingness to support terrorism and further isolated his regime. The raid also cemented Israel's reputation for military prowess and its commitment to protecting its citizens no matter the cost. Beyond his brutality, Idi Amin was known for his erratic and often bizarre behavior. He seemed to revel in the spectacle of his own power, often making pronouncements and engaging in actions that seemed designed to shock and intimidate. He declared himself conqueror of the British Empire and bestowed upon himself a series of grandiose titles. Amin's eccentricities, however, masked a deeply insecure and paranoid individual. He surrounded himself with yes-men and sycophants, purging anyone he perceived as a threat. Amin's paranoia extended to his personal life. He reportedly changed his sleeping quarters nightly, fearing assassination attempts. He distrusted even his closest confidants, often promoting and demoting officials on a whim. Amin's erratic behavior, while often portrayed as comical, was indicative of a deeply troubled and unstable individual. His actions were not merely those of a brutal dictator, but of a man teetering on the edge of madness. This instability only exacerbated the chaos and terror that gripped Uganda during his rule. In the early years of his rule, Idi Amin enjoyed some international support. Western powers, initially relieved to see Milton Obote gone, were willing to overlook Amin's human rights abuses. Amin, for his an image of himself as a charming, albeit eccentric leader. He famously visited Britain, meeting with Queen Elizabeth II and other dignitaries. However, as Amin's brutality escalated and his erratic behavior became more pronounced, international opinion turned against him. The expulsion of Asians, the Entebbe raid, and the mounting evidence of human rights abuses made it impossible for the world to ignore Amin's crimes. Britain, once a supporter, had diplomatic ties with Uganda. Amin, increasingly isolated, found himself aligned with regimes like Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, which provided him with financial and military support. In the 1970s, Amin's regime was teetering on the brink of collapse, its economy in ruins and its international standing in tatters. The world that had once tolerated Amin was now united in its condemnation. In 1978, Idi Amin's regime made a fateful miscalculation. In an attempt to seize territory and divert attention from his domestic problems, Amin ordered the invasion of neighboring Tanzania. The invasion backfired spectacularly. Tanzanian forces, backed by Ugandan exiles, repelled the invasion and launched a counter-offensive. As the Tanzanian army and Ugandan rebels advanced on Kampala, Amin's grip on power crumbled. His demoralized and poorly equipped army was no match for the determined invaders. On April 11, 1979, Kampala fell and Amin fled into exile. He first sought refuge in Libya, then eventually settled in Saudi Arabia, where he lived out the rest of his days. Idi Amin died in exile in 2003. He never expressed remorse for the atrocities committed under his rule, and he continued to insist that he was the victim of a Western conspiracy. Amin's death brought little closure to the victims of his regime, but it marked the end of a dark chapter in Uganda's history. Even in death, Idi Amin's shadow continues to loom large over Uganda. His reign of terror left an enduring legacy of fear, trauma, and distrust. The country's social fabric, torn apart by violence and suspicion, took decades to rebuild. The economic devastation caused by Amin's policies continues to have repercussions today. Despite the horrors of the past, Uganda has made remarkable progress in the years since Amin's downfall. The country has experienced periods of economic growth and relative stability. There is a new generation of Ugandans determined to build a brighter future for their nation. However, the scars of Amin's dictatorship are far from healed. The memory of his brutality serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy and the importance of safeguarding human rights. The story of Idi Amin is not just a tale of a brutal dictator, but a cautionary tale about the human capacity for both good and evil. It is a reminder that the fight for justice, freedom, and human dignity is an ongoing struggle, one that requires constant vigilance and unwavering commitment.